I was 20, fresh into my junior year at college in a small, sleepy town nestled deep in the Midwest. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and time feels like it moves just a little bit slower. Between my classes and a part-time job, I barely had time to settle into my new dorm. Across the street stood a modest brick chapel, its bell ringing every morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Attached to it was a women's shelter, its simple design masking the incredible work being done inside. I wasn't particularly religious, if anything I was a skeptic, but there was something about that chapel that pulled at me. Like gravity, it drew me closer each time I passed it. Inside, I met Father Gabriel, or Father Gabe as everyone called him. He was 80, but you'd never guess it. Sharp as a tack and carrying an aura that commanded respect, he had studied theology and demonology in Rome. He moved and spoke with the kind of quiet authority that made you believe he knew things others could never understand. When I first approached him, I wasn't searching for God. I was searching for answers. Strange things had been happening to me, things I couldn't explain. I told him about the gift that ran in my family, a heightened sixth sense, like an invisible antenna tuned to signals no one else could hear. At first, Father Gabe listened in silence. Then he performed a series of private tests, and his conclusion left me shaken. My connection to the unseen world was strong, maybe too strong, and it wasn't just me. He believed I could help others. That's when he told me about Danny. Danny was 7 years old, the only child of Sarah and Mark, a hard-working couple from a neighboring town. They weren't churchgoers, but were known for their kindness and devotion to their son. Sarah, a nurse, had first noticed something was wrong months earlier. Danny's laughter faded. His appetite vanished. Sleep eluded him. His once bright and cheerful demeanor turned dark and brooding. Doctors had no answers. He spoke in voices that weren't his own, whispering in languages no one in the family understood. The breaking point came one night when Sarah heard Danny laughing uncontrollably in his room. She opened the door to find him perched on top of his bookshelf, his tiny body impossibly still, staring down at her with eyes that had turned jet black. Terrified, she turned to her parents, who suggested their Baptist pastor. But even he realized this was beyond his understanding and directed them to Father Gabe. The day I met Danny, his parents had strapped him to a hospital bed with restraints Sarah had borrowed from work. His frail frame seemed out of place in the stark, white bedding. An IV delivered the nutrients, keeping him alive. Father Gabe stood at the foot of the bed, clutching a worn Roman ritual book. Beside him was a younger priest, Father Randall, his assistant. The tension in the air was suffocating. I had no idea what to expect, but I could never have imagined what I was about to witness. The first session began with a prayer. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting flickering shadows on the walls. Father Gabe's voice was steady, each Latin syllable piercing the oppressive atmosphere. Father Randall and I joined in, our voices intertwining in an eerie chant. Barely 5 minutes passed before Danny started thrashing violently, his thin body contorting in unnatural ways. His back arched so sharply it looked like his spine might snap. Then, with a guttural growl that made my blood run cold, he bit through his IV tube, spraying blood across the room. "Hold him down," Father Gabe commanded. His voice cutting through the chaos, we sprang into action. His mother silently wept as she bandaged his arm, while I pressed down on his shoulders, feeling an unholy strength radiating from his tiny body. It wasn't just physical strength. It was something darker, something primal that made my skin crawl. By the fourth session, we were all drained. Danny's body was wasting away, but whatever was inside him was as strong as ever. Midway through the ritual, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the room. My heart pounded in my ears as I fumbled for a flashlight. The air turned thick with the stench of decay, and then I heard it. A deep, mocking whisper right next to my ear. "Are you afraid now?" I screamed and dropped the flashlight, its beam bouncing wildly as it hit the floor. For a brief moment, the light illuminated Danny. He was standing on the bed, his face twisted into a grin so sinister it barely seemed human. His eyes were black voids, consuming all light. The flashlight flickered out again, plunging us back into darkness. When we finally restored the light, Danny wasn't on the bed anymore. We found him wedged between the ceiling and the top of his bookshelf, his body twisted in a way that defied logic. He cried as we brought him down, his small voice trembling with confusion. "Why am I up here?" he asked. But we knew. Whatever was tormenting him was growing bolder, and it wasn't done with us yet. The 7th session was the worst. Danny's body was a shadow of its former self, but the malevolence inside him was thriving. Halfway through the rite, I saw it. Not just a feeling or a shadow this time. I saw it. Perched on Danny's chest was a grotesque figure. Its skin was an oily black that seemed to devour the light. Its elongated fingers ended in razor-sharp points, and its eyes, oh, those eyes, white, cruel, and infinite, staring at me as if it knew every fear I'd ever had. "Get off him!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. The creature turned to me and smiled, revealing a maw filled with jagged teeth. "Don't get so angry," it rasped. "It's all just a game." Then, with horrifying ease, it sank into Danny's chest and vanished. Danny's restraint snapped like a twig. He sat up, his head swiveling to face me, his eyes once again black and soulless. A chilling grin spread across his face. "Do you want to play a game?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. The room erupted into chaos. The power cut out again, and a gust of icy wind slammed Father Randall and Sarah against the walls. Candles extinguished one by one, leaving us in complete darkness. I heard the scrape of metal against the floor, followed by Danny's voice, dripping with malice. "Flashlights are against the rules." By the 8th and final session, we were running on fumes. Danny was barely alive, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. Father Gabe stood taller than I'd ever seen him, his voice unyielding as he began the final rite. Danny fought harder than ever, screaming in voices that weren't his own, his words an incomprehensible jumble of languages. The room grew icy, frost forming on the windows, but Father Gabe didn't waver. He pressed on, his words cutting through the darkness like a sword. With one final, ear-piercing scream, Danny collapsed. Silence fell over the room. Sarah rushed to her son's side, cradling his fragile body. His eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in months, they were his own. The entity was gone. The aftermath was a blur. Danny survived, but his family moved far away, desperate to leave the memories behind. As for me, I couldn't escape the images burned into my mind. The creature's eyes, its mocking smile, the way it seemed to know me. It haunted my dreams. Father Gabe told me later that not every exorcism ends in victory. "We were lucky," he said, "but I didn't feel lucky, I felt marked. Even now, years later, I can still hear its voice in my nightmares. Don't get so angry, it's all just a game."